the Historic District Commission at 6 o'clock. I'll start with a call to order and the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you all rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Hollis,
Yes?
Murphy,
Yep.
McCanny,
Here.
Perkins.
What?
I still have Perkins on this list, sir.
Not on ours.
Yeah, this is a
Oh.
little update.
Okay,
How about if we go Turpinning,
Turpinning,
Present.
Hutton,
Here.
Grosvenor,
Grosvenor, here.
Grosvenor, I'm sorry,
Salinas,
and Wendell.
and
Here.
Okay. Do you not have a copy of tonight's agenda?
Yes, sir, I do.
But yours has Perkins on it?
The full sheet I have hasn't been updated yet, my apologies.
Okay, that's right. Approval of the agenda, before we get into that, I would like to amend the agenda. Under minutes, I want to add the minutes from the October 30th meeting of 2024. Then I would make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
I'll make the motion.
I second.
Motion by Murphy. Support by Turpinning. Are there any additions? Oh, that's the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. It's been a long time since I've been able to say that. We haven't had a 7-member board. Now, approval of the minutes, let me explain. In October, we had a meeting scheduled on October 30th. When we got to that meeting, we did not have a quorum. Hang on. Yeah, due to a lack of quorum, this meeting will need to be rescheduled, and it was closed at 6:04. So, in the original packet, those minutes weren't there, but I said because that was a legally scheduled meeting, we had to have minutes. So those are there. Then the meeting was rescheduled on November 4th, and those minutes are in front of you. So my question would be, for the minutes of November 4th, are there any additions or deletions?
November 4th, yeah. Roll call as follows. For the vote, I did vote for it.
Is that on the second page?
Second page, yeah.
So the minutes need to be amended to show that Murphy voted. That's on page 2. Kurt? Are you with us?
Yes, sir,
Yes, sir.
It's right here.
Yep.
Okay. So Chair would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
I'd make the motion.
Second.
Motion by Murphy, second by, was that Turpinning? Grosvenor.
Grosvenor.
Thank you. I knew it came from that direction. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0. Statement of purpose. The mission of the Holly Historic District Commission is to safeguard the heritage of the village of Holly by preserving the historic district in the village that reflects the elements of the village's history, architecture, archaeology, engineering, or culture. The goal of the Commission's work is to stabilize and improve property values in the historic districts and the surrounding areas, foster civic beauty, strengthen the local economy, and to promote the use of the historic districts for the education, pleasure, and welfare of the citizens of Holly. I'll move on to public comment. Members of the public can address the Commission once recognized by the chairperson. Comments are limited to a maximum of 4 minutes for items not on the agenda. Commission may extend this time by up to an additional 4 minutes by a majority vote. For items on the agenda, comments may be made after Commission discussion prior to Commission vote. Prior to addressing commission, members of the public shall state their name and address for the record. No public comment. Okay. So that moves us on to presentation. Ron Campbell's not here yet. I have a sneaking suspicion that he's probably targeted 6:30.
Yeah.
I don't have a text from him calling off. So while we're waiting for him and before we get down to the old business, let me do this. First of all, let me welcome Ms. Hutton and Mr. Grosvenor.
Correct.
Grosvenor, I got it right that time?
That's right, sir.
To the board. We also have a new village liaison in Mr. Wendell.
Yes.
So let me, for the sake of the three new members on the board, let me just give you a little background of what we do here.
Fantastic.
You saw it in the statement of purpose. Ms. Snow is not with us this evening, so you may not know this answer. Although I see you have did you guys you have a notebook. What do you have in your notebook?
Oh, no, I made this notebook.
Okay, so neither one of you received a copy of the Secretary of the Interior guidelines?
I received a packet when I was sworn in.
Yeah. I believe it's in there.
Let me see what you got, if you don't mind. This is the same stuff you had.
I do not know.
That's for
There's some papers here, but
Here it is. Yeah, this here?
yes. This commission is bound by these requirements. That's what we work on.
Yep.
I will take a moment to explain. Mr. Wendell, did you get?
No, I did not get that at all.
So Kurt, we're gonna need to get these requirements to Mr. Wendell. What was in the packet that was given to Ms. Hutton and Mr. Grosvenor needs to get to Mr. Wendell.
That would be the SHPO papers that, from previous emails, I'm guessing, is that?
No, it's that.
Oh, the Department of Interior guidelines?
It also has the,
I've got this book already from council, but I don't have our special thing for,
and an open meetings handbook. It also includes this as well.
because I've got the open meetings handbook. I'm jealous, it's pretty fancy.
These are the standards you go by. Are they the same ones you have?
I can see.
Mr.
Yeah,
Cullis, I can
standards
start
for
a list of
rehabilitation, yes.
who needs what, and I will drop an
got-
email and we'll get to Chris and we'll take care of it as soon as possible for everybody, okay?
Right, that's your village council.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then I got this right here also. That's the Robert Rule
right,
orders.
but that's not what this is.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that I didn't have
Yeah.
something over that.
He's gonna need this group of papers here.
Let me take over and show it. So you can, or pen six.
The Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, rehabilitation is treatment and standards for rehabilitation. It's this one. It's, if you have the ability to make a copy, you could do it right now.
I'm not gonna be able to get it, I don't believe I'm gonna be able to get next door.
Okay.
Let me just snap it. I'll just, jot it down real quick, make sure I get it going.
All right. When you're done, pass it back to Ms. Hutton.
Seems to be 50 pounds by the time I'm done.
So now I'm gonna explain to you what's on the paper, but I took it away from you.
That's
What
all
you'll find, Mr. Grosvenor, on that sheet, if you hold it up, where it said, see, right there, read that line to me.
Read what?
The dark line above. your-
Standards for rehabilitation.
Those are the standards. When we make motions based on a presentation, we either make a motion to grant a certificate of appropriateness, or we make a motion to proceed. That's based on the guidelines from the Secretary of Interior. Is there a paragraph that tells you on that, Mike?
Yeah, so there's four we'll do. We'll do a motion to issue a COA, Certificate of Appropriateness. A motion of COA with conditions, a motion to deny, or a motion and a notice to proceed.
So those are the four motions that we make based on an application. Those motions, in order to support those, that other list that you read off of,
Yes, sir.
the one, I think it's 1 through 10, or,
1 through 10, yeah.
I don't have it because I just gave it to him. Those have to be, we have to quote one of those numbers. So you'll see Mr. McCanny has it all right here in front of him, and typically, he's the one that makes our motions, so the ducks are in a row. But you'll be able to look at that and say, I agree with this because of this number, or this, they have to qualify within those numbers.
Fair enough.
And you'll hear the conversation as we go.
Sure.
So it really eliminates any emotion that may be involved, because we're
We have
under the
parameters.
guidelines. And you will find that I'm a real stickler for following the parameters, especially because we've had other people in front of us. I would make examples of businesses downtown that have come before us, that we've made certificate of appropriateness, that we've made approvals for. They've had to go through the process. I have a real hard time when somebody comes in and wants us to let it go this time.
I understand.
If I make these four people toe the line with the proper windows, the proper process, the expense that's involved because they have a historic building, it doesn't make any sense for me that this guy over here, whether he's an absentee landlord or not, can just do whatever he wants.
Fair enough.
Or so that you know, and I don't know if Mr. Nitsky has a report for us tonight on, it's under old business, the status of the buildings downtown.
There has been nothing further since the original reports from to the board, and I know there was some questions that
Okay,
we
so
were
we're waiting,
answering
we're
in
waiting.
regards to the paperwork that was sent in, correct, to Lansing,
so-
at SHPO?
So that no, that's not what this is.
No, I'm,
That's number one. I'm talking about number two.
right, but,
Let's wait till we get to it.
okay,
All right, so you'll see as we get there. Ron Campbell's from Oakland County Planning. He's gonna be here tonight to make a presentation on historic district, why they matter, some of the yeses and nos involved. He's got a good presentation for us. That being said, and I know he knows it's tonight because I had a text from him earlier to clarify that we were still on. I said we were, so we should see him. My guess is he's probably gonna be here about 6:30, because I've not heard from him. That being said, so we are currently dealing with some buildings downtown that have not met the requirements, that have not gone through the proper procedure, and that's what we're trying to work with. We do have a couple of other have reached out to me that have plans to do some things. They will be coming in front of us. But the other thing that we're working on, well, it's under old business, so I might as well wait till I get there. Let's go ahead and open in old business so we can discuss those. We can come back when Ron gets here. If somebody would make a motion to table the presentation,
I so move.
Second?
Turpinning and Murphy, all in favor?
Aye.
7-0. Old business number one, HDC guidelines. This committee worked for a little over a year at putting guidelines together. Mr. McCanny took the lead on that and put a lot of it together. We're gonna need to get a copy of those guidelines, both to Ms. Hutton, to Mr. Wendell, and to Mr. Grosvenor. Am I getting there?
You're getting there, buddy.
Okay. And to Mr. Grosvenor as
You
well.
can take a look at those.
You can look
The
at these.
trajectory is good.
So this is a book that we have put together for those people that live in the historic district. It gives them some guidelines. We need to send that to the village council for approval. But before we can do that, it is with the SHPA office in Lansing, State Historical Preservation. Once we get their approval on the book, and they may send us some modifications, I don't know. Once we get their approval, it'll come back before this commission. We will approve the final, and then we'll send it to the council for approval. But that will go to all of the people in the historic district, so they have an idea of what they're supposed to do.
Is this the master, or is this for?
No,
That's not your
That's-
copy.
That's my working copy. I just
That's
wanted, just
Mr.
wanted to
Pellet,
show you.
what was that? The state historical
It
what?
feels, I mean, it
It's
feels
called
like
SHPA.
it's about a B
It's
plus.
SHPO,
Yeah, but what's it represent?
State Historic Preservation
Okay,
Office.
Preservation Office, okay, thank you.
If you want to look at it, that's,
Yeah, if you, Ms. Hutton, want to look at those. There. So that's a project we've worked on. We've also worked on boundaries and borders for the historic district. We have some issues of the way it was put together in the beginning, and some people were allowed to opt out, and that's not how a historic district is formed. If the village council decides that this is gonna be the historic district, and we have to support that with documentation why this should be, then the village council votes it yes or no. People aren't allowed to opt out. It's for the greater good of the village, it's for the greater good of the district. Why do we have a historic district? We don't want a situation, and if you go around our town, we actually have some of those houses. Back in the 50s and the 60s, there was a new invention came out, it was called aluminum siding. And the salesman went door to door, and they said, never have to paint your house again, we're gonna cover everything with aluminum siding. And they took off the architectural accoutrements, they took off the trim boards, and they just slapped the baby up like a box and wrapped it in aluminum. Mr. McCanny's house is a great example of that. There's another good example on the corner of Center and Maple, kind of kitty corner from my house. Those two houses were wrapped in aluminum back in the 50s, probably from the same salesperson,
1956, yep.
56.
He
And
knows, he remembers.
When they came before us, the aluminum siding came off with, we've got before and after pictures of McCanny's house, before and after pictures of the house on the corner of Center and Maple. We got back leaded windows that were up in the peak that had been covered up. We got back on that particular house, the window trim, the front porch boards were just straightened out and covered. Well, they actually go up to a peak and come down, and go up to a peak and come down. All of that was restored when the aluminum siding came off. Now, we worked with those people, especially McCanny's, because even though they're not supposed to have vinyl siding, in McCanny's case, much of the original lath had been taken off. So they got, rather than a certificate of appropriateness, they got a motion to proceed. We got all the bay windows back, we got the fancy trim that's up around the windows, but we did allow the vinyl siding because they didn't have the original. On Cortez' house, which is the one on the corner of Center and
Mabel?
Maple, they had pulled the aluminum siding off, but the house had been pelleted because everything, they had a sheathing put on the house with staples. So all of the boards had these staples and the nails, and then somebody drilled a bunch of holes because they shot insulation in. So it was pretty unrealistic to ask them to replace the boards. However, both with McCanny's and with theirs, we were able to require the 4x4, which would be taking it back to the historic look of those original boards. The positive was, we gained all the window treatments, we gained the treatments up in the corners. If you look at Cortez' house, on the carriage house in the back, above the garage doors, there are doors where they used to put the hay up. All of that had been covered with the aluminum siding, it was all gone. So if you look across the street from my house, there's another one of those houses that's wrapped in the aluminum siding. All the treatments from the windows were lost, all the trim was lost. Someday, if they ever decide to do something to that house, they'll have to come here and we'll have the ability to say, here's your limits, here's what we expect. And it brings that back. In a historic district, there is research, it's been proven, the values of the homes increase because they stay looking historic. People want to move there. People want to move in and know that they're protected, that the Victorian next to me isn't gonna get all covered up and hidden or end up looking like stainless steel siding or, we've had people come before. These homes have the tall, narrow windows. Think about the building that just burned in Battle Alley. When they get ready to rebuild that building, they're not gonna be able to come in and put some modern medical-looking building. They have to, yes, it'll be a new building, but they still have to stay with the architectural design of the alley, which is the long, narrow windows. They have to have cornices on them. They're gonna have to have trim boards. They're still gonna have to fit in, instead of looking like a big sore thumb sticking in the middle of the alley.
Makes sense to me.
So there are reasons for the historic district. This town is rich with that. We have homes that are back in the 1860s. And we've had people come before us and think about these Victorian, I'm not gonna label the people, but think about a house that has these tall, thin windows and the look. They wanted to tear them all out and put a big bay window. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't belong on that house. And it would look like somebody, it would end up looking like a sore thumb. Now, you will get people that'll argue sometime, but it's my house, I should be able to do what I want. We understand that. But if we're protecting the overall historic district of this community, then that's why the Secretary of the Interior guidelines exist, and that's why we promote them.
Now, where is, now, we don't, well, you're saying that's got an update for it, but when will we have got the district lines of the historic district?
So we have some maps of the original work that was done. We've been informed by SHIP office that we need to do some more work, so we'll start to visit that in the months coming.
Okay, was asking.
Well, I'm trying to not put too many things on the plate, because we gotta get a couple of these things through.
No, I don't, I just didn't know.
Jackie, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. So who determines where the historic district actually is?
So back in the 80s, there was a group, I think the only person that's left with us anymore is Joe Mishler. It was Ardith Reagan, Greta Mackler. There was a group of people, Sue Les is still with us. She was part of that original. They went out, did the original documentation, and they said, these were the areas that should be historic. But I know there were a few people that said, if you do that, I'll take you to court. And so they ended up creating the historic district with some of these exceptions. Well, that's not how it's supposed to be. So we're trying to go back and get it fixed so that it's correct and filled in. We've had much discussion over that. And I've had discussion because we've had different board presidents. We need to know that the board's behind it, because if they're not behind it, then you need to, you can't hold some people to a standard, and then the person right across the street can do whatever they want. It's either all or none. That's my view. That's been the view of this board. So, those are some things that you'll be hearing about, seeing on it. Ron Campbell will talk to you in his presentations about what can be done, what can't be done. He'll give you reasons why this was done or shouldn't be done. He'll show you some other communities. When the fire happened downtown, it was determined early on that Andy's Place was gonna have to come down. I immediately got on the phone to Ron Campbell and I said, I need the cavalry. Come on out, take a look at this. We need to protect the front of the building. There are parts of this building that can be preserved, and yet the rest of the building will be new. What you see today is part of the outcome of those meetings. Ron got involved. We had engineers come out. We could indeed save the facade, the front of the building and the side. Why is that so important? It's the character of the Andy's Place. It's the character of the building. It's the character of the block. It's part of this town. You know, you see it all the time, historic Holly. So that's why those exist. So we're gonna work on them. And we're waiting right now for the guidelines to come back from the state for our next step on that.
So,
If we go to number 2, for the minutes, no action taken on number 1, just, you can put down report file. For number 2, status of the buildings downtown. We have been asking the village on several buildings downtown. There is one, I don't have the addresses for you, but you're all familiar with downtown. Opposite the Battle Alley Coffee,
I have the addresses off,
that you can rattle them off right now.
yep,
So what's the address for that building?
for the opposite of the coffee,
The
you're
art
talking
store.
201, 203, that building, South Saginaw.
So 201 and 03.
That'd be the first two portions of that building.
Well, and that building also has an address on Battle Alley.
That would be back to a little further, and that is
102.
102.
102, because I'm 103, so that'd be.
That would be 102 through 104
So
would be in that building.
if you would like, you can stop by and look at the building. If you look at me for a moment, the windows are tall and narrow, and the tops of them curve like this. They came in when nobody was paying attention without a permit. They pulled the windows out, they replaced them with aluminum. You can't do that, they have to be wood windows, they have to be the shape of the window. They pulled them out, they popped in these white aluminum vinyl windows, and they just put plywood on the top.
Is that 102 through 104 where this occurred?
It's 102 Battle Alley, it's where the art store is, across from the Battle Alley Coffee.
Thank you, sir.
That is a landlord that owns the building, not the individual businesses. But they come in and they replace those windows. Then you have another one down the alley on the corner opposite Ziggy's Ice Cream.
111, 113, 115 would be the addresses in that building. There has been correspondences with, some correspondence, but nothing since before the holidays in the way of
So
follow-up.
that business is an interesting business. Let me give you the history. I've been on this commission for, I think, 12 years. I started as a commissioner when Nancy Rebar stepped down. I became the board. That must have been about 2017. The building at this address, it's currently the tea shop, and it's right across the street from where the other building burned down. It's next to RHL, in between RHL and Ziggy's. That building, over 10 years ago, came in on the weekend and pulled all the windows off the front of the building and changed the whole facade without coming before the board. They were made to come back before the board, they were made to take some of the stuff off, they were made to change it, and the one thing we couldn't do was make them put the windows back because they were gone. But the rest of it they had to put back. Now, when RHL, which is the building right next door, came and wanted to replace windows, he had to go out and have them special made. You can look upstairs. They had special windows made. They had special windows made for the back of the building. Now, does the back of a building in the alley count? Anybody want to voice an opinion?
Yes, it should.
I would think it does.
In
So
this
the-
town, it does,
So the
yes.
answer to that is yes and no.
Right.
It doesn't count if the alley has buildings on both sides and it's just an alley. In other words, it's not meant for the public. The back of the buildings where the parking lot is for the Red Devil, those count because they're open to the view of the public. The back of the buildings on Saginaw Street, on the same side where the township office is, the backs of those buildings count because they're open to the parking lot. If they were buildings that were backed up to each other, then they wouldn't be an issue. On the back of the buildings where the Red Devil parking lot, for lack of better terms, that parking lot, you also have a business in there. The barber shop's in there. So those are considered fronts and are in play just like the other side. Well, this particular building, about 2 months ago now, showed up on a weekend, pulled the windows off the back and replaced them with vinyl, shorter windows than what they're supposed to be. So we immediately lodged a complaint against that. The biggest issue there is the building next door was made to adhere to all the rules and regulations and do it like they were supposed to. I can't make this guy do it and let you do whatever you want. I can't make Battle Alley Coffee went through the whole process with us when they redid that building. And they did everything according to the parameters that were set. The building on the other side, because he comes in on a weekend and just does it without any permits, doesn't mean it's legal. We pushed this with SHPA and with Ron Campbell from Oakland County, and we absolutely have the authority to make them come out, take it out, and redo it. It's not our fault that they did it without permits. The problem with that building on the corner is we've been pushing that for a couple of years now, and it's changed hands. The new owner's saying, I bought it that way. Well, it's been under the radar for quite some time. The other building was Ziggy's. They came in and they did some work on the front of that building. They came before us, they got approved. But the window in the alley side where the mural of the circus is, they put a piece of plywood over the glass. So we've been after them for a couple of years. That's finally been taken off. And you can now see what you're supposed to see, the flowers that are painted on the inside, and we got that back. So 1 out of the 3 has been remedied.
Right.
But it's the other 2 we're still waiting to see, and it's my understanding, according to you, that the one Battle Alley store, the windows on the back, that we're working with them?
We've had correspondences with them and replies. I know we've spoke briefly about it.
Because he should be coming before this commission. Now, I will tell you this, I'm really disappointed in that building, because after what we went through 10 years ago, when he came in on the weekend and did the front of the building, he knows better. Same landlord.
That looks tacky.
So, that one will be before us. And then this other building, if you look at the side of that building,
You see right there.
201 and 203 Saginaw, you'll see where they,
Right there, those ones.
one of the windows they took out, they just made a small window. The plywood, they didn't bother painting the plywood. It's just a sheet, it's just a curved piece of
That's how
plywood.
they're supposed to be.
So
Instead of being
there's a
like
reason
that.
why we have this historic district, and there's a reason we want to protect it. And these are some of the
That
examples.
what you're talking about right there, is that part right there? If you look over the,
Yes, you can see it in that window there. The plywood that's just up.
so that's the third window that's on this building, he's got
But
like
if you
that.
look at the,
Tacky.
can you get to the front of the building?
Yeah, go like this. And then
The Saginaw side looks way worse, but yeah.
Yep.
Get the front of the building on there. So if you look at the front of the building, these aren't even up and down windows, they're side by sides.
But they
But
just
there's
put-
3 of them, then this one's a different window altogether, that one's a different window altogether, and that one's different. But you'll see where the whole top part, they just tried to fill it in with some plywood and a little decal. You wanna send that down? And Jackie, I'll send it back your way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that looks, it does
But,
look very, very
Doug,
tacky.
if you slide it left or right, you'll see the difference in those windows.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure enough.
And those were windows that shouldn't have been one piece of glass, they should have been.
Yeah, I see
Kinda
what
like
you've done there.
this right here.
Yeah. Well, no, this is
Looks
lead,
tacky.
but they would have been 4 section,
Styles going on.
4 squares, basically.
yeah.
I just can't get over that.
So those are some of the issues that
front of
we're
that building.
trying to deal with. I was hoping to get a report tonight.
Yeah, that's plywood up top there. And what about like, I know that they live there and that's their houses, but what about air conditioners that are just like hanging out the window like that? I mean, I know we can't tell a renter or a landlord they can't do that, but could we make, where they have to have like a portable unit where it's just basically right there inside the window area and not a whole unit hanging outside the window? Or it's just a hose coming out and venting out the house?
They can have a window air conditioner. It's just the windows have to remain
I was,
the old windows.
I was just asking
Or
because of
if they are so far beyond that they can't be repaired, then they have to be new
remade.
windows that are made to fit that.
Yeah, I'm
If I
sure
ever get
Josh
the
already-
contractor going on my house, you'll see
I live across the street.
that porch.
I'm just
on
saying,
Church Street.
you know,
We had to order those, they were special windows to fit in, to look like what was there before. Randy Redmond had to do it, the other buildings downtown had to do it, Bob Hoffman had to do it when he fixed his. So they've all had to come before him.
Well, I think the rich history and the historical value of this town is what, I'm endeared to the most. You know, it has a very
Oh,
rich-
there he is, right there. I was just calling you.
Hey, very well done, very well done.
Actually, that's the only thing.
I was just getting ready to call you to see if you forgot us.
Mr. Cullis? I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Hi, Ron.
Is
Good,
there
how are you?
anything in,
Wendell,
in the
can we get
village
order back here, please?
about,
Commissioner Hutton has a question. Go ahead.
you know, the tornado destroyed half my roof. And we have 2 layers of shingles, and then we have cedar shake, which is no longer up to code. So it has to all be torn off and replaced. Our insurance company is fighting us tooth and nail. They just want to replace the shingles that are missing. Is there anything in the village saying you can only have 2 layers of shingles, the cedar shake?
That's not an HDC question. That would be a question for the building department.
Oh, okay,
Yep, that's not something that we oversee.
okay.
Now,
Thank you.
we would be involved if they're trying to take cedar shake off there and replace it with regular shingles, if you're in the historic district.
I don't know if we're in the
Are
historic
you on the north
district.
side of, are you on the west side of Saginaw?
Let's see,
What's your
on the
address?
east side, we're 404.
I don't think
404?
that section's in the historic district.
No.
But you
What's
could
the
check your
street?
address, Mr. Nitschke should have a.
He's
Mike's
got it
got
right here.
yours.
I have it right here, I think. Yes. What's the address?
404,
Street name?
South Saginaw.
Okay.
Yeah, I wondered about why we weren't
Ron,
in the
we need to get you set up.
Yeah.
Josh? where
He
you
just went out the door right just a second ago to go get something, I think.
Where did he,
He just walked out the door.
do you know what he was doing?
I think he was going to get something, I don't know.
So when they do fix the roof, they have to leave, if I was in the historic district, they would have to leave the cedar shake on.
They would have to come back here. Yeah,
Okay.
You probably have to get something like the cedar shake, so it's back to the original. Cause then,
oh, great.
would you like me to go out in the parking lot, Mr.
Well,
Cole?
I don't understand what he did.
Would you like me to go?
You don't just get up and walk out of a meeting.
Would you like me to go see if he?
I don't see your property in the
Yeah, do you
district.
mind? If he's out there having a cigarette, I'm gonna kick him in the.
Careful, it's gonna record stuff.
That's why I was asking how they determine it, because my house was built in the 1870s. And the church next to it, is the oldest church in the village. It was
Josh,
built in
where'd you go?
1855.
Wow.
So I was
We're in the
wondering
middle of
how
a meeting.
come our street, parts for a
Mr.
street.
Camo
It
needs to
was,
get set
it
up.
was a voluntary admission into the district at that
Oh,
point.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
and so
So
we're,
people had to
But you
volunteer,
could at least say
you know,
something
say,
so we
hey, I
know.
wanna be,
Yes.
okay, I understand.
and back then, there was also a tax credit for houses in historic districts, but that was stripped away sometime.
What was that?
The historic district tax credit
No, it's come back.
was back.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's wonderful.
It
But it
was-
was taken away for a long time,
It was
so
taken
then,
away
you
when,
know,
it was one of the things that was taken away under Governor Snyder,
Yeah,
and it's been reinstated.
Okay.
So there is a tax credit for, major restoration of historic buildings.
Well, they used to get a tax credit just because your house was in the district. is
Okay,
from
well,
what I
that's not,
understood.
that's
Not
not,
anymore.
Cutting your yards.
This-
The only
this one's
benefit
for
now
rehab.
is, 30% of the,
It had to be
I think it's 25%.
literally cut to a certain
course.
height. And it had to have certain.
No, it's, well, it is, it's 25, because it comes from two different areas.
but they were supposed to come up with the rules and how they're gonna do that, and they end up doing that.
Yes.
Oh.
Yep.
Tell us it's bigger than I can.
Don't start that. business, you can just, for both of those items, just report given.
Report given.
Yeah. And they'll need to stay under old business for the,
I'm probably pissed.
okay? If the board members would care to move over to the chairs so we can see,
Is that what you want to do?
well, the presentation's right behind me, but if you'd like to move over there so you can get a better view,
I can see it.
I'm good.
you're all good? Okay.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I recognize several of you, and you've been through this before. So we'll give you guys a quiz, okay?
Uh-oh.
No.
I was told there wouldn't be any math involved in this.
Multiple choice, I'm pretty good.
Well, thank you for having me.
That's too close.
I understand that there's some new commissioners, and we'd like to educate. So we'll do this in 3 sessions, kind of like we did last time. 3 sessions, I do about 15, 20 minutes each time we meet. Tonight, we'll just do session 1, which is the introduction. And that will include
He has a microphone up behind him so people can hear him retaping.
introduction. And so we're gonna cover kind of the overview and history of preservation in the United States. We'll talk about the legal foundation, what makes something historic, the levels of designation, and the legal challenges. Then we'll see the benefits. Okay, thank you. So, overview, this is just Oakland County. We have 198 state registered historic sites in the county. 72 of those are national register, 2 are pending right now. There are 2 national landmark sites, that's the highest designation you can have. And we have 1 national natural landmark. The 2 national landmark sites would be Cranbrook, you see in the upper right-hand corner, and the Dodge Estate, Meadowbrook, right there in the center on the left. The national landmark, we won't rule on anything like that, but it is I'm trying to think, Highland Recreation Area, which was the Edsel Ford. He called it his nerve retreat, so. Now, there's always been development pressure. Historic structures, many of you probably recognize this, Independence Hall in Philadelphia. This was scheduled, they tried 3 times to tear it down. Shortly after the independence was signed there, they thought it would have a better use as a commercial structure, and so they were going to tear it down. And people of Philadelphia said, whoa, wait a minute, this is pretty important to our history. And 2 more times they went through it, and they finally saved it. The United States took it over, and it's now a national landmark. Actually, I think it's a world site landmark too, because this is where the Declaration of Independence was signed. We have demolition by neglect. I don't know, does anybody recognize this? Mount Vernon, absolutely. Fallen into wreck. I mean, it was, you can see the ship's masts there that are propping up the porch and everything. Again, this was a private effort. It still is all privately owned. This was a ladies' organization that took it over, and they've restored it and brought George Washington's home back to what we see today. So it's not always meant to be, but a lot of times it's just lack of understanding of what we should and shouldn't do to our buildings. This one, you know, they're just wholesaling, ripping the roof off. You mentioned earlier, Jackie, about your own roof. and it's not in historic, but if you can see, this was historic wood shingles. Now, if you were ever going to rule on this, what would you do? If I came in and I said, well, I can't afford to put shingles back up there, how would you rule? What would you ask me? And I'm looking to the guys that have been through this before, okay?
I forgot the right answer.
Well, well, first of all, you'd say, well, what are you going to replace them with? Right? So I would say, well, asphalt shingles. And you'd say, well, can you afford wood shingles? Well, I've kind of priced it out. I'd like to put wood shingles, but it's just outside my price range. But you could say, well, there are products on the market that are not wood, that are asphalt shingles. They're a higher quality shingle, and they will resemble wood. So, you know, that would probably be okay. Okay, so it's not, you're not always forced to do something that you can't afford or don't want to do, but it's how is it going to protect the character of the building? Then sometimes there's lack of caring, just outright. This is a theater in Detroit. It's now an auto garage. Beautiful ceilings, just busted out, and they used the structure and poured a slab, and it's now a parking. So it's not always the best use of the space. You say, well, how can we do this? So what's the legal foundation for this? And it was in 1966, it's National Preservation Act. President Johnson signed it into effect, and what it did was it created a number of things. It, one, declared that national or historic preservation was in public interest. And that's important because like you have your zoning, like you have your building codes, you can rule in a locality what you want and where you want it. And all of that is in public interest, health, safety, and welfare with the building codes, and public interest with historic preservation and your zoning. Secondly, it set a federal policy for preserving national heritage. And how they did that was they said any federal agencies that's spending money is going to be charged with following the Secretary of Interior guidelines, and we'll learn more about that. And it's going to come under review, Section 106 review. Clarkston, just down the road, they created a historic district, National Register, through downtown. And when MDOT, Michigan Department of Transportation, came through and wanted to eliminate parking and widen the road, they said, whoa, you got to go before a Section 106 review. And that committee reviewed it, and they said, no, this is harmful to the historic district. We're not going to allow you to widen the road. And so they were able to keep their main street through town. Established the National Register of Historic Places. Those places I told you about earlier, those are on the National Register of Historic Places that we saw. And then it also created the SHPO. The SHPO, as you sometimes refer to it as, is the State Historic Preservation Office. Every state has one. All 50 states has one. And any tribal land has their own guidelines that will affect their jurisdiction. So what gives us the right in Michigan to have a historic district? Okay, that's Preservation Act of 1969. It took effect in 1970, but it was historic preservation as a public purpose, and you can read it there. What it did is had to follow one of certain things. It safeguarded the heritage of the local unit by preserving one or more historic structures or districts. It stabilized, and its object was to stabilize and improve property values in the districts and surrounding areas. And I'll show you later, it's done just that. Foster civic pride and beauty. Strengthen the local economy, and we'll show you results of that too. And promote the use of historic districts for education, pleasure, and welfare of the citizens of that locale. So with all that, you have a pretty hefty task ahead of you, don't you? How do you rule on this? Local historic districts are significant and protected by the ordinance, which Holly has a historic ordinance, and it's reviewed. Most of that all comes under the Secretary of Interior standards and guidelines, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit tonight, but more in future sessions. And then it provides a legal foundation for the locale or the municipal, local municipal unit of government to create a historic district if they so desire. I think in Michigan, there's a little over 100 historic districts throughout the state. So not every town has one, and it's really up to the people of that community whether they want it or not. So what makes something historic? You guys remember all this, right? No, I doubt it. Do you? Okay.
Most of it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, generally, it has to be 50 years or older, okay? It has to be associated, now, is any one of these, okay? But the criteria for evaluation is 50 years or older before they'll consider it. It has to be associated with events, activities, or developments that are important to the history of the region or the nation, okay? It could be associated with the lives of people important to the events and activities or the development. Significant achievements in architecture, engineering, or landscape history, or the potential for archaeological finds. So, for example, let's see, what do we have here, George? That would be historically significant.
Well, first and foremost, you got the train depot.
Train depot. And why is that significant? Well, you go through and you say, well, did it help the development of Holly? Boy, it sure did. It was the first time that two railroads crossed one another in the state. And you go through the history of it and you find that, wow, there was, this was the northernmost point for the Civil War. And when soldiers were called to Washington to volunteer, where'd they leave from? Over 1,000 men in one day left from Holly. In fact, the town fed them. And so all that history that goes into that depot is just incredible. So, yes, that
President of the United States came here on a campaign.
more than one, wasn't there?
I just know of the one, I was there.
Oh,
Bush
okay,
came through.
Bush came through. I was thinking maybe Truman or Eisenhower came
Might have
through
been.
too. But all those are significant
Carrie
achievements.
Nation.
Carrie Nation. And you put all those events together and you see why the railroad station, the depot, is so important to Holly. It was the first Union station. And the architecture itself, you have two station masters windows. No other Union station in the state, or what I've seen around the country, has ever had that. So they were experimenting. They were trying things. A Union station is basically where two or more railroads use the same depot. So they never built anything like this. And so that's why this is important. So you see some real significance here, and that's why. Carrie Nation coming. What Battle Alley. What a tremendous thing that is to preserve that. So that's what you look at when you look and say, well, is it historic? Now what happens is they fill out a survey. There was a historic study committee that went before you, and they looked at all those properties and they said, we think this is historically significant. We think this. They packaged that all together and they took it to the state. The state reviewed it and sent it on to the National Park Service, which is the ruling body at the federal level. And they said, yeah, they've got a good nomination here. These are historically significant buildings, structures, and we agree with you. You make a district out of it if they want to. So, questions? I don't want to go too fast here. Okay. So levels of designation. We have three of them. They're kind of being whittled to two, but the National Register of Historic Places. It's the State Register of Historic Sites, which this is kind of falling out of favor right now. They use it, but not very much. And in your local historic districts. Now, the difference between all these, the National Register of Historic Places is the official list of buildings and sites and structures that are worthy of preservation in their significance to American history. Hence, the depot, right? It was significant not only in Holly's history, but in the national history. What was it? Lincoln declared, "Thank God for Michigan." Now, whether he said it as a result, but it was the prompt response that came from Holly and the men that they put through there that got him to Washington quickly. And he wasn't sure who was going to respond to this, but when the men showed up from Holly, yeah, it was significant events. Now, the state register, as I say, it's kind of falling out because nothing wrong with it. But they said, you know, it really doesn't do anything. It's noteworthy in the state history, sure, Holly Depot is. But oftentimes when it's significant in state history, it's also significant in national. So they've kind of lessened it because most of your state register sites are also on the national. So, stands to reason. Now, the local historic district, you might find something that's important to Holly, but not necessarily the nation. I think maybe one in point would be the Circus House. Would you agree? I don't think that's on the national register, but it's certainly significant to Holly and the area, but not at a national level. So what does all this mean? Well, when we look at this, National Register, it offers some review of Section 106, which is what Clarkston used to prevent the widening of the road through downtown. There are tax incentives, historic tax credits. Perhaps on your roof, if you were in a historic district, you could say, well, I'm going to replace it with wood shingles, and that would be a qualified expenditure, and you could take up to 20% of your cost by doing it. And that would come off your federal income tax. So if you have a $50,000 project, take 20% of that, well, that's not too bad. It's what, $10,000 that you would receive. State register, yeah, as I said, there's not much you do there. Really what it does, it qualifies you to buy a marker, one of those green markers, and that's about it. And you buy it. State doesn't provide it, you buy it. So it will qualify you to buy it, okay? The local, that's where the real protection comes from. And it will vary from community to community. It protects the local community. So the decisions you make here affect only here in your districts. And the incentives, well, it's priceless. Now, I didn't update this, I'm sure, because there are now statewide historic tax credits available for not only commercial properties, but for homeowners. And I think that's a 25% tax credit. So and this is where we have to be a little careful here, because what happens if you rule on a property, say, Jackie, you come in with that roof, okay, you're in a historic district, and you say, well, I can't afford this, but I'm gonna just put up shingles, or I can't afford it, but I'm only gonna put up shingles, and the commission approves it. It goes to the state for approval, and they all of a sudden say, oh no, you didn't meet the Secretary of Interior standards. So we can't approve your tax credit. Well, doggone it, you guys approved it first. I thought it was a shoo-in when I go to the state. So that's what you have to be careful of. That what you're doing would be viewed by the state and the national as acceptable. Okay, what gives me the right, what gives you the right to tell me what I can do with my property? Not Secretary of Interior, but the landmark, Johnson signing into law. And this went before the federal courts, okay? Let me give you a little history on it. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, New York City, it was Penn Central Station. Penn Central was a beautiful Beaux-Arts. It was done by a famous architect. The interiors were just stunning. And they tore it down to build Madison Square Garden. A box, nothing like this. And people were outraged. And so the people of New York said, well, we're going to pass a landmark status. They didn't know anything about National Trust and all this. So they passed the Landmark Status Act. And then a few years later, Grand Central Station was going to be doing the same thing. And I said, well, we're going to tear it down. We're going to build a big office building here. And we'll put the station underground. Well, the City Landmark Commission, I said, no, we've made that historic. We've designated historic. You can't do that. Well, it's my property. Well, they had some influential people that came on and helped them out. Bess Meyerson, Jackie Onassis, and the mayor of New York. They were all opposed to tearing down Grand Central Station. Went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that local jurisdictions are empowered to grant that type of thing. Okay, so U.S. Supreme Court has given you the authority to rule on local matters involving the historic districts. Grand Central Station stands today, and it's just as profitable as ever. So has the law worked as it's intended? Well, has it safeguarded local units by preserving one or more? I would have to say, yeah, it has. We'll go through some of this. Has it stabilized and improved historic districts? The value, property values? Show you where it has, so yes. Foster civic beauty? I think it has. We could show you some good examples of before and after in Clarkston. And it's just unimaginable as to what it was back in the 70s. It has strengthened the local economy. And it does promote the pleasure and education and welfare of citizens. Let me go through a little bit. Safeguards the heritage. Does it do it? Mackinac Island, National Register, right? Under extreme development pressures. Big hotels want to come down there and tear out all the little hotels and put up, and the local historic commission, like you, said, no, it's safeguarded, we're not going to allow you to do it. They went to court, and the court sided with the commission. They knew coming in that they could never tear these buildings down. Let me show you what some of the adaptive use have done. This is in Flint, the Durant Hotel. It stood empty for a good 25, 30 years until about, it's probably been about 15 years now. People put $30 million into it using the tax credits. So that $30 million times 20% qualified expenditures, that about $6 million that they got in historic tax credits. It's now housing, totally full. Bring housing downtown. The Knapp's office building, $36 million investment. Qualified, $158 million.
Where is that building?
That's in Lansing, downtown Lansing. You see this time and time again, even here around Oakland County, the little schoolhouse out in Leonard, Ellis Barn, downtown Pontiac, the old Sears store was converted to housing, and it used the historic tax credits. The lower right-hand corner, that was the mill in Rochester, used the historic tax credits. At the very center at the bottom, that was a little house that was moved because it was going to be torn down to build a Burger King on Dixie Highway. And they moved it to Clarkston. It's now an office building, and they use the historic tax credits. Now, does it stabilize and improve property values? Let me show you how this was conducted probably about 10 years ago now, because we've heard this throughout the nation, that, oh yeah, we've done a study and it shows that it definitely improves it. So Michigan Historic Preservation Network, which had a conference here, what, in 2021, 20? A couple years ago. Yeah. They hired consultants to come in and do the study. And what they found was, and they took 4 cities, 4 communities, two neighborhoods in the four communities, identical, except for the designation. These are all houses that were in the same school district. They were all houses that were built about the same time. The only difference being one was designated historic and the other one wasn't. They found that it added 6 to 35% value to the property values in those designated districts. And it consistently outperformed the property values of non-designated neighborhoods, even during that Great Depression or recession we had back in 2010. Sure, they went down, but they did not go down as low as the property values in the non-designated
You'll
areas.
notice in that slide, the two homes on the left are Holly.
Son of a gun. Does it foster civic beauty? Well, I think so. I think, how many people ever travel to historic districts when you're out vacationing or something? Yeah. Sure. And we'll see a little bit of that in just a minute. Franklin, National Register Historic District. Quaint. Keweenaw National Historic Park in Michigan. Mining town. It strengthens local economy. In fact, tourism in Oakland is going to be pushing towards that, is getting tourism here. Tourism, what they call heritage tourism, is one of the main, leading economic drivers in the country. People stay longer and they spend more money when they're visiting historic sites. Oh, there we have it. Most popular in the U.S. Genealogy. Tourism employs about, this is just heritage tourism, employs about 7.4 million people. And it directly contributes $740 billion to the U.S. economy. Now, this was back probably 4 or 5 years ago now, so. About 113 billion in tax revenue. And of course, that doesn't all come locally, but so don't get your eyes in that. And 78%, this is a very high percentage of all leisure travelers participate in the cultural and heritage activities visiting these places. And I think that was true when MHPN was here. They visited the stores and the shops, the restaurants, all downtown. And what that does, that 78% equates to 118 million adults. As I said earlier, tourists stay longer in historic districts, 2 to 3 days longer, therefore they end up spending more money. And tourists typically spend, $994 per trip versus non-tourist areas, which is only $611. So it does make an economic difference. Now let's talk about economic return. This between 1999 and 2011, the state had I'm getting ahead of myself. The incentives of director rehab expenses. If you took $1 million, you were going to spend that. 36,000 jobs were created, and statewide impact was for the money that was spent on restoring older properties. For every dollar they invested in a tax credit, it returned $11. So if you invested $11 here in Holly, $11 was returned in that investment, either in higher taxes or in all the tourism that we saw. So if you wanted to create jobs, where would you put it? Took $1 million, would you put it in chemical manufacturing, automotive manufacturing, or restoration construction? Where is it best to spend your money? I'm looking for an answer on this one.
Oh, that would be C.
Oh, you got it, Mike, okay.
I know the answer's always C.
Yes, C is always C. Yes, rehabilitation. That $1 million would create 11 more jobs in manufacturing chemicals, or 8 more jobs in manufacturing vehicle parts. So if you're looking to put people to work, that's the best way to do it. And more money stays local in that. Why? Well, you know, if you're building a new house, but you're gonna probably get your wood shipped in from Washington, maybe the drywall from China, maybe some of the materials from South America. But when you do restoration work, well, you're gonna hire Joe down the street, right, to do your plumbing, to do your, he's gonna bring parts that he's getting at the local stores, you know? So all that expense stays local. And last but not least is that, what is it? It promotes the history for the districts, for the education, pleasure, and welfare of our citizens. This happens to be the Hess Hathaway Barn out in Waterford, yeah.
Williams Lake Road.
I'm sorry?
On Williams Lake Road.
Yeah, yep. So, you've got your own historic districts here, and they are well worth it. You've done a good job in protecting the history of the area. I know the devastating fire, it's cost a lot. And we're still working on that. We hope to get it up and going. I think, what was it, last December, Andy's place was approved and.
Yep.
And,
Andy's place came before us for the entire building process that they're going through right now. All that was approved through here.
This was after the fire.
Pardon?
This was after the fire. I'll see the arcade.
No, that's
Oh,
before.
yeah, before.
Building.
before,
Oh, I
yeah.
see, okay.
The arcades are.
Yep. And what really helped Andy in getting in, she's getting a grant from MEDC, we believe, probably around $300,000-$400,000. And what really helped her get that was the history of that building. And the fact that she was going to restore the front.
Before you came in, I talked to them. I was telling, we've got 3 new members here tonight, and I was explaining to them that you were instrumental in saving the front of that building, because the early reports were that it all had to come down.
Oh,
Andy's
okay,
place.
yeah.
And we
Okay,
got
good.
involved with that to save that facade.
And she wanted to. I mean,
And
they
she
wanted
wanted
to.
to,
yeah.
Yep. And it makes a big difference. It'll be cheaper in the long run to save it if you can than to rebuild it. So, and the history of that building, just like the depot, is just tremendous. It was a bank originally. I don't know, how many knows the history of that building? I don't want to repeat myself, but
That was a bank?
it was a bank originally, built as a bank.
I thought it was a bar for its entirety.
No, oh, no, it was, oh geez, it'd been several things up until the, probably 40, 50 years ago.
You know the building where Ziggy's Ice Cream is?
Yeah.
That was originally a bank.
Was it?
If you go inside that building, the vault is still there.
Interesting.
They use it as a
Neat.
cooler.
When the hippie store was there, it was her changing room.
See, oh, that's perfect, you know, I like that.
Well, I know that Andy's place is, the last building that was on that section, the last original building, because any pictures that Lloyd posted on Facebook, they're all 3 stories, but there was 1 2-story,
Yep.
and that was that end building. And when the fire happened, I thought that'd be a shame to see that just,
Well, keep your finger crossed, yeah.
well, now it won't, I mean, it's being rebuilt now, so.
So just so you understand, the Moose Lodge, that row of buildings, that is the original building, just minus the top 2 floors.
Yeah, that's what I meant, that's the original footprint.
Yeah, that was the Opera House.
Fascinating. That,
But the bottom part is still the original buildings, it's just the 2 floors were missing.
And that was really Main Street at the time, I
So
mean,
where the moose
thought to
was,
be.
that was.
but the
Yeah,
bank
I
itself,
guess that's what George is saying, the moose and antique shop next to it, I guess.
yeah,
Okay.
That's all the original building.
That
just my-
whole thing was the Opera House, that whole section,
From Andy's place down to the end,
yes.
that was a 3-story building, it was the Opera House. When it burned, the 2 floors were lost, but the main floor was still there.
In the basement.
That's interesting.
1929, right? Burnt down?
that
not sure
I'm
the
not
year.
sure.
I think that's right.
Is that the end of your presentation?
It is. You want me to get off? Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's not. Okay. So one thing is, The greenest building in America today is one that you don't have to build. Why? Because it already exists. And I'll go through this real quick because I don't want to take up too much time. The environmental impact of it's what we call embodied energy in these buildings. And if we've already used that embodied energy, why tear it down and spend more energy and then even more energy to build? Consumption of materials, 40% of these materials will end up in a landfill. And, what is this, name out of Washington? He calculated, he's a place-making economist, he calculated that 1.4 million aluminum cans, if you took them back, that's the equivalent of saving one-story building, single-story building, about 20 by 40 feet. So you can either save 1.4 million cans, or you can restore and adaptively use the building. Let's see, what do we, oh, your roles and responsibility. I can make a copy of this all the way. One thing that you'll need is know your standards, and we'll get into that. Know your local ordinance. Be ready to say, well, why do you have the right to tell me what I can do with my property? Again, it's the same as zoning laws. You know, can I build a factory next to your house if I'm zoned residential? No. Can I build an office building there? No. You know, it's all for public interest. Be familiar with Holly's history? Also, the Open Meetings Act. I think, George, you run a pretty tight ship on that. Oh, yes, avoid not only the appearance, but conflict of interest. If you've got something coming, let's say, Jenny, that it was you coming before this commission, you know, you shouldn't be voting on your own property. So you'd excuse yourself. Present it, leave the room. Conflict of interest? No, I left it up to my fellow commissioners to decide. So avoid that at all. Follow the rules and procedures. We'll get into more of that. And the rest is pretty, we'll bring it all up at some point in time. But this is the last slide. No, it's not. It's one more after this. But do you recognize where we're at there?
It's in front of the coffee shop.
Yeah, right there at Battle Alley. We had a pretty good crowd that day too, I think, standing up. Filled that whole block, so. This is my last slide. So, thank you. Any questions? You ready for another session then? See, I'm not gonna quiz them this time, Al. But you
Thank
rely
you.
on them, they
Thanks.
should.
Thanks for giving me a chance to study. Thanks for your help.
Oh, yeah,
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Ron.
you're welcome, more than welcome. My pleasure.
Ron, as always, I appreciate your energy and the lessons you bring for us. I do want to touch base on three things he said right there at the end, when he talked about conflict of interest. When Mr. McCanny's house came before the HDC, he left his seat here and he went over on that side of the table and he became a resident. When my house became before the HDC, I did the same thing, turned the meeting over to Mr. McCanny. I went over there with Ron Campbell. We presented what we were doing with my house. He touched on a phrase there, early adaptive use. Some people have raised the question on the carriage house on my house, when we picked it up and put it back down, we had to tear the old stone foundation underneath the house out. That foundation had crumbled. It had two sections of the walls had just completely fallen down. The issue was, what would it cost to repair those and put them back versus what could we do if we tore the whole thing out and started new? The second issue was, at the time, and I have pictures of those if you're ever interested, if you walked into the lower section, which was known as the barn, it was just above the top of my head. I used to put a hat on so that when I hit my head, it wouldn't hurt so bad. In justifying the cost for that building, that house, which is 4,000 square feet, only has a one-car garage attached. We picked the building up, raised it 3 feet, and gained a 30 by 30-foot garage underneath.
And that's the building that's
It's the carriage house behind my house.
off of,
The driveway's on Park Street.
Yep.
The other thing that we did, that property, that home was built in 1860. It owned all of the property down to the lake and all of the property including the elementary school. As those, in 1901, Park Street got put in, they sold off lots. In the 1800s, they sold the lots to the houses east of me, and they built those houses. What is now the elementary school used to be the horse arena. He was a carriage horse races is what he did. Well, when they sold the lots off behind the house, they got so close to the carriage house, the door faced the other house. In today's standards, you couldn't drive a truck down, turn and pull into the garage because there isn't enough room. So when we picked the house up, we moved the door from the back of the building to the right side. And Ron Campbell, in his presentation, he called it adaptive use, to make the building viable, to justify the cost, to save the building. But as he talked about tonight, it would have cost us $25,000 to tear the building down. Then if we wanted to build a garage back there, which we would have been allowed to do, that garage wouldn't have looked architecturally like it matched the house. And it certainly wouldn't have been the size of the building that's there.
Right.
So those were projects that I can talk about on this board because Mr. McCanny owns one, I own the other. But in both cases, we left this side of the table and went to that side on it. So we've tried to keep everything within those guidelines and rules and adhere to that. I will say one more thing in reference to that last page. When we get a house in front of us, you'll get the agenda and it'll have drawings and pictures of what the people want to do. I encourage you to go visit the site, but I want to caution you on talking to the homeowners because you may say something you didn't intend to be interpreted the way they interpret it, and they can bring it back to this board and say, well, he gave me permission to do something. So when you do go out and look at the properties, try to not get too involved in a conversation. Let the folks know. You don't have permission, by the way, to go past the front of their house.
Yeah, you can't go on their property, it's
You
still their
can't go in the backyard, you can't walk around, but you can look outside, and most times you'll see what they want to do.
are you able to like knock on the door and say,
Well, we don't encourage you to walk up and knock and say, I'm here to look. If you're looking from the street, you can look. If they come out and want to know what you're doing, you can
Okay.
say, I'm with the HDC, I have your application, I was just getting a look at the house. If they, and just tell them, I can't really engage in too much conversation. That will happen here.
just getting personal observation?
Right, so, but we've had it happen a couple times. Mr. McCanny and I've gone together to look at a site, and we had one lady come out, was pretty upset with us.
Be upset.
And we just let her get done, and when she was all done, I said, can I say something to help you? Well, and she kind of went round two. When she got done, I said, I'm gonna recommend that your application be refunded to you because your house is in the historic district, but it's non-contributing. There's one house that burned, and it was rebuilt just a few years ago. You could tell it had a modern foundation, it was a modern house. It just looks like the rest of the neighborhood. She didn't need to come before us to get permission to do what she wanted to do. So sometimes it works out in their favor. Many times, we've had to stop people from what they're doing. They've come here, they've worked with Ron. I'm thinking of that porch on the house on College Street. They were just gonna put kind of a lean-to and repair the porch. When we got done, we had the designs, they came out. The people are very happy with the new porch. It looks like part of the house. As Ron has told you before, it definitely added value to the house as opposed to what it would have looked like before. So we do a lot of good here. We take a little heat sometimes, but that's why I asked him to do this training so that you guys understand why we do what we do and why we look at things the way we do.
Very informative, I appreciate that, quite.
Well, he's got 2 more sections,
Right.
and those will be just as informative as this was. And are we gonna be able to do them next month and next month?
If you invite me to, that's what I'm planning.
Okay, that's, you heard that, Mr. Nitsky? Just keep him on the presentation for the next 2 months.
Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Cullis,
Yeah.
if we see something like downtown where somebody's like doing a weekend rip out because no one's around, who would we report that to?
You can call me, and then I get a hold of the village
Okay.
on it.
Just for knowing, just for where,
Well, this one, these two came from other people doing the same thing, contact me and said, did you see what's going on over there? And it's interesting, they always seem to happen on the weekend when there's nobody around.
Yeah, you don't have the authority
that
to go.
Sunday night
and
after
stop.
the game kind of thing?
You don't have the authority to go and stop.
Well, no, I didn't think we did, but I didn't know who we'd contact,
Just
who we'd go into.
go
Oh,
through me.
George, yeah.
And then I go through the village. Are there any other questions from the board for Mr. Campbell?
For me?
Well, I wanted to bring up Battle Alley Coffee because they did everything correctly. And I think that's really significant because they had pictures at some time before they had bought it. Somebody remodeled it and improperly, and they had the pictures of the way it was before. And when they brought it here, we approved it, and it's now back to the way it was originally.
That happened with Battle Alley Coffee.
Yes.
It happened with the building down on the corner that's owned by Mr. Hoffman, Altered Designs. That building was brought back to what it used to look like. In fact, that building had T111 siding on it, and as he tore it off, all the original artwork was still hidden under that. That also happened with Avia's. Avia's had been redone in the 60s. It had the recessed entry with the display windows, and they came when they put the restaurant in and put it all back to the front looking like it did. So we've had a lot of good process with the buildings downtown, and the town looks better for it. Anyone else? All right, that'll take us down to the commission staff comments, which I just did. That'll lead us next to our adjournment, which is at 7:28.